Have you ever felt like everyone's telling you that you can't do something? That your idea is crazy, that you're gonna fail, that you should just give up before you even start? Today, I'm gonna tell you the story of a woman who heard exactly that, and yet she built something so incredible that it ended up saving the lives of the very same people who mocked her. Picture this. We're in the year 1887, in the middle of nowhere in what is now Utah. A young widow, alone for barely 6 months, finds herself in a remote canyon with her 7-year-old son. Her husband died in an absurd accident. He fell from a horse while chasing a lost cow, hit his head on a rock, and never woke up. 3 days later, she was completely alone, with no money, no help, and one massive problem to solve. She needed a barn. Her animals weren't going to survive the winter without shelter. Her husband had planned to build it that spring, had even started cutting timber, but he'd only managed to bring 3 loads before the accident. It wasn't enough. Not even close. Buying more lumber would cost money she didn't have. Cutting and hauling logs herself was physically impossible. So she sat there, night after night, wondering what to do, until her son gave her the answer without even knowing it. One afternoon, while she was reading him a book about the ancient cliff dwellings carved into canyon walls by indigenous peoples, her son pointed to an illustration and asked something simple. "Why did they build in the rock, Mama?" "To protect themselves from the weather and from enemies," she explained. "The rock sheltered them. It stayed cool in summer and warm in winter." Then the boy, with that pure logic only children have, asked, "Could we build our barn in the rock like they did?" And that's when everything changed. Behind her cabin was a canyon wall with a natural alcove, a kind of shallow cave about 40 feet wide and 15 feet deep. Enough for a barn. The roof was already there, formed by the rock itself. She would only need to build a front wall to enclose it and some interior dividers for stalls. Sounds logical, right? But when she mentioned the idea at the church social, the response was unanimous. She was crazy. "You can't carve a barn out of solid rock," they told her. "It's impossible. The Indians used caves that were already there. They didn't dig them out themselves. And even if you could hollow out that alcove, how would you frame it? How would you hang doors?" She just said something simple. "I'll figure it out." The neighbors shook their heads with pity. By the end of that evening, she heard the whispers. "Poor woman, grief has affected her mind." She left early that night, jaw set, with a determination burning inside. And the next morning, she started working. She began by clearing the space, hauling out rocks and debris with a wheelbarrow. Her son helped, carrying smaller rocks in a bucket. They worked together from dawn until the heat became unbearable. The neighbors kept mocking her. One of them, a man named James, would ride by on his horse every week just to laugh. "How's that rock barn coming? Find any gold while you're digging?" But she kept working because she knew something they didn't understand yet. People's opinions only change when they see results, not when they hear arguments. The real challenge was creating anchor points in the sandstone to support the main beams. She needed to drill deep holes into the rock. Hard, slow, brutal work. She used a star drill, a steel rod with a star-shaped cutting tip. The process was painfully simple. Position the drill against the rock. Strike it with a sledgehammer. Rotate it a quarter turn. Strike again. Over and over, hour after hour, until the hole was deep enough. Each hole took days to drill. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her shoulders ached constantly, but she persisted. Her son helped by clearing away the rock dust with a brush, keeping the hole clean. During water breaks, sitting in the shade of the cottonwoods, her son would ask, "Tell me again why we're doing this, Mama." "Because we need a barn to protect our animals through winter," she'd explain. "And because when you don't have money or help, you have to use what you have, which is this canyon wall and our own 2 hands. And because the neighbors say we can't," the boy would add with a small smile. She'd ruffle his hair. "That too, maybe." By September, she'd drilled 8 deep anchor holes and was ready to install the main support beams. She rigged a pulley system using rope, anchoring it to a sturdy cottonwood tree. With her son helping to pull the rope, she managed to raise each beam into position, inch by inch. She carved wooden wedges that fit into the drilled holes, then drove the beams into position. The wedges swelled with moisture to hold everything tight. Then came the front wall, which she built using a combination of the remaining timber and sandstone blocks she quarried from a softer section of the canyon. The wall rose slowly through October. She laid courses of stone, mixing mortar from sand, lime, and water. Her son helped mix the mortar, carefully measuring the proportions. Inside the alcove, she used more stone to build dividers, creating stalls for the cows, a pen for the pigs, a roosting area for the chickens. She built a loft to store a winter's worth of hay. By early November, the barn was complete. She'd spent 3 months of hard labor, dawn to dusk, and the result was unlike any barn her neighbors had ever seen. The neighbors remained skeptical. One neighbor visited in mid-November and walked through the barn with obvious surprise. "Well, I'll admit it's sturdy," she said carefully. "But what happens when winter really sets in? That rock will be ice cold. The animals will freeze. The rock will be warmer than you think," she said confidently. "In winter, it holds heat better than wood walls do. The earth is a natural insulator." The real test came in late December. A winter storm rolled in from the north, bringing bitter cold and heavy snow. The temperature dropped well below zero. Snow fell for 3 days straight, driven by winds that howled through the canyon. Drifts built up against the cabin walls. It was the kind of storm that could devastate unprepared homesteaders. She worried about the animals. She'd moved them all into the rock barn before the storm hit, but now she needed to know if her design would truly protect them. On the second morning of the storm, she bundled up and waded through thigh-deep snow to the barn. She pulled the door open and stepped inside. The difference in temperature was immediate and dramatic. The animals were calm. The cows chewed their hay contentedly. The thick rock walls had created a buffer against the extreme cold. She felt vindication wash over her. The storm broke on the 4th day. She was shoveling a path when she heard a wagon struggling up the snow-covered road. It was James, his face grim. "We need help," he called out. "Our barn collapsed under the snow. The roof gave way last night. The cows are trapped under the timber." He stopped, suddenly noticing that her barn was not only standing but appeared completely undamaged. "How is your barn still?" he began. "Can you help us?" "Of course," she said immediately. Over the next few hours, she helped the family dig through the collapsed barn and extract their terrified cattle. As they worked, other neighbors arrived with similar stories. Other barns had collapsed. By evening, a group of desperate homesteaders stood in her canyon, looking at her rock barn with new eyes. "I need to ask a favor," James said quietly, his pride clearly wounded. "Can we bring our cattle here? At least until we can rebuild in the spring." She looked at the faces of her neighbors, the same people who'd mocked her. She saw desperation, humility, and genuine need. "Yes," she said simply. "Bring them all. There's room." Over the next days, the canyon became a refuge. Several families brought their livestock. The barn, which she designed for her modest herd, now housed animals from 6 families. And as they worked together caring for the animals, the neighbors examined her construction with growing respect. "These anchor points," James said, running his hand over the beam attachments. "You drilled these into solid rock." "Star drill and sledgehammer," she confirmed. "Same way they drill blast holes in mines." She explained about thermal mass, about how the rock absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly at night, about how the earth provided insulation that timber walls could never match. The neighbors listened with the attention of students. Their earlier mockery forgotten. By February, word had spread throughout the territory. Homesteaders from miles around came to see the barn built into the canyon wall. One afternoon, a government official arrived to document her technique. "I've been hearing remarkable stories about your barn," he said. "This is extraordinary. You've essentially rediscovered construction principles that have been largely forgotten. Would you object if I included this in my report to the territorial government?" "Include whatever you like," she said. "If it helps others, I'm happy to share." In March, as the snow finally began to melt, the neighbors started rebuilding their barns. But this time, several of them incorporated elements of her design. And they all came to her for advice, treating her as an expert rather than an eccentric. One evening in April, after all the borrowed animals had been returned, she and her son sat outside their cabin, watching the spring sunset paint the canyon walls. "Mama," her son said thoughtfully, "do you think Papa would be proud of what we built?" She considered this carefully. "I think your father would be proud that we survived, that we found a solution when we had a problem, that we didn't give up when things were hard." She paused. "But I think he'd be most proud that we helped our neighbors when they needed us, even after they'd been unkind." The barn stood for decades, becoming a local landmark. Other homesteaders built rock barns using variations of her techniques. Years later, when her son was grown, he would bring his own children to see the barn his mother had built. "Your grandmother built this with her own hands," he'd tell them. "Everyone said she was crazy. Everyone said it couldn't be done. But she knew better. She trusted herself to find a solution." The children understood the lessons she'd taught without words. That sometimes the best solutions are the ones everyone says are impossible. That a determined person with limited resources but unlimited creativity can accomplish remarkable things. She'd built more than a barn. She'd built proof that sometimes the wisest path is the one no one else has thought to walk. That the strongest structures are those that work with nature rather than against it. And that the best answer to mockery is simply to keep building, one stone at a time, until the work speaks for itself. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about those moments when everyone told you that you couldn't, leave me a comment telling me what dream of yours everyone said was impossible. And if you think someone needs to hear this story today, share it.